Hey, hey, hey. Hi everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Uh Today we'll be talking about the weariness of the soul, trying to understand trauma, weariness, and God's restoration. I don't know if you guys have ever wondered why, or maybe it doesn't happen to you, maybe it's just me. But anyway, have you ever wondered why, like, you can be exhausted even when you've done nothing physically demanding? Why you can sleep for 8 hours or more and still wake up tired? Why certain wounds seem to follow you, even after life has moved on? The Bible has a word for this, and it's called a weary soul. Now, let me be clear: not every form of tiredness is a weary soul. Sometimes we need rest, sometimes we need medical care, sometimes we need to grieve. But there are moments when the body is exhausted because the soul has been carrying burdens it was never meant to carry. And we often think tiredness is strictly physical, but sometimes the body is simply expressing what the soul has been carrying all along. Maybe you've walked through a heartbreak or even multiple heartbreaks. Maybe you've lost people you loved. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you've battled a chronic illness. Maybe you have lived through a quiet disappointment that slowly changed something deep inside you. And the question isn't just what happened. The deeper question is, what happens to the soul when it suffers, when it goes through pain, when it goes through rejection and trauma? Most of us don't know how to process pain, no offense, because no one ever teaches us how to process pain. We are not born with a manual guide on how to do life, on how to handle pain, on how to handle trauma. And processing pain is not our default response. Usually we just survive it. But when pain enters our lives, it does not just wound our emotions, it touches the soul, the very essence of who we are. It affects the mind, the heart, and even our will, which is our ability to choose. And so, to understand how pain affects us, we first need to look at what the Bible means when it talks about the soul. In the Old Testament, one of the primary Hebrew words for soul is nephesh. And nephesh is much richer than what we often imagine today. We tend to think of the soul as some invisible part of us that exists separately from our daily lives. But in Hebrew thought, nephesh refers to the whole living person: your inner life, your desires, your emotions, your appetites, your identity, the very essence of who you are. And Genesis tells us that when God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, man became a living nephesh, a living soul. The soul is not something you merely possess, it is the life that God breathed into you. And closely connected to this word is another Hebrew word called leb, L-E-B, often translated as the heart. Now, when scripture speaks about the heart, it is not referring only to our emotions. The lab is the control center of our inner life. It is where we think, where we choose, where we believe, where our desires are formed, and where our affections are directed. Think of it like the processor of a computer, or maybe even your phone. You can have the best phone in the world, the best screen, the best camera, the best apps. But if the processor is damaged, the entire phone automatically slows down. The processor doesn't create the information on the screen, it processes instructions and directs how the entire system functions. And if the processor is functioning well, everything else works as it should. But if the processor becomes corrupted, the whole system begins to slow down and begins to malfunction. In much the same way, the lab is the processor of our inner life. What is established in the heart eventually shapes how you think, what you believe, the choices you make, the relationships you build, and ultimately the direction of your life. And this is why Proverb tells us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. The Bible isn't simply telling us to protect our feelings, it is telling us to guard the very control center from which our entire life is directed. And when we put these two ideas together, the nefesh and the leb being our control center, we begin to see a fuller picture of the soul. The soul is your entire inner world. And so imagine what happens to that inner world when it experiences betrayal, when it experiences loss, rejection, trauma. It does not just affect the surface, it reaches into the deepest part of the nefesh. And when trauma strikes the lab, that inner control center, it no longer operates in harmony with the rest of our inner being. An internal conflict begins. One thought begins saying one thing while our emotions begin saying another thing. Our desires pull us in one direction while fear paralyzes us in another direction. We might know the truth intellectually, yet we struggle to live from it. And the soul that was created to live in unity now becomes divided. And this is why trauma affects far more than our memories. It changes how we think, how we trust, how we relate, how we respond, and even how we see God. And instead of living from wholeness, we begin living from survival. And when survival becomes our default way of living, weariness is inevitable. And so, if wounds are never addressed and brought into light, they don't disappear, they remain hidden within us, slowly shaping our reality, slowly shaping our boundaries, our lives. And we were created to live in wholeness, but trauma affects and fractures that wholeness. And to protect itself, the soul begins to partition. Suddenly, there are internal walls, boundaries, partitions of grief, shame, fear, disappointment. The soul recognizes its vulnerability, and instead of bringing those broken places into the light where they can be healed, it often does what seems safest, it hides them. Instead of living naked and unashamed, the original vulnerability that God created us to embrace, we bury our pain in the shadows. And this is honestly not voluntary, it is just a coping mechanism for survival. This is what psychology calls fragmentation, a protective mechanism the soul uses for us to survive overwhelming moments. But while the pain goes underground, it does not disappear. And so we end up carrying burdens into seasons we were never meant to carry them. You were wounded at 10, 16, but now you're 30, 40, 50, and you're still carrying that same pain. And maybe the wound has been reopened again and again through different circumstances, relationships, different disappointments, different losses, and every new experience seems to add another layer until eventually your soul becomes exhausted. One day you wake up tired, not because you did not sleep, not because you've been working too hard, but because your soul has been carrying a weight it was never designed to carry. And everything around you might look fine from the outside. You may have the career, the money, the opportunities, people around you, but yet deep inside you know something is not right. And sometimes the pain you are carrying is not even entirely your own. Research in epigenetics has shown that the effects of trauma can influence future generations. Patterns of pain, patterns of fear, anxiety, hypervigilance, and survival can be passed down through families. For example, when researchers studied the children of Holocaust survival during World War II, who endured unimaginable trauma, starvation, and loss, they made a remarkable discovery that even though these children had never experienced the concentration camps themselves, they carried unique chemical tags on the genes that regulate the body's stress response. They were born with nervous systems that were already highly sensitive to danger, reflecting the emotional legacy of what their parents had endured. Imagine a parent who grew up in constant instability, violence, or extreme poverty, and for years their body has learned to stay on high alert. And even after their life became safe, that stress response remained wired into their nervous system. And if their child grows up in a loving, secure home, but still battles unexplainable anxiety or hypervigilance, that child may well be carrying the biological imprint of the parent's past. They are carrying the echoes of a battle they never had to fight themselves. And epigenetics doesn't mean that our destinies are locked in and predetermined by our ancestors. It simply reminds us that what one generation walks through can leave marks on the next generation. It reminds us that healing is not only personal, it can also be generational. As trauma can leave a legacy, so can restoration. And when God heals what has been wounded in one generation, that healing has the potential to shape the generations that follow. When you accumulate when you begin to see the accumulation of personal wounds, family trauma, disappointments, losses, and hidden grief, it is now easy to see why the soul grows weary. And a weary soul does not stop searching, it simply just searches in the wrong places. If I just become successful, if I finally get married, if I earn more money, if I look a certain way, if I achieve enough, the soul begins searching outside for something it cannot get inside. We begin we begin searching outside ourselves for something that can quiet what is happening within us. We begin distracting ourselves with achievements, we numb ourselves with entertainment, we lose ourselves in relationships, we chase the next accomplishments because we hope that maybe the next thing will finally make us feel whole. But you cannot outrun a weight that lives inside you. And because wherever you go, your soul goes with you. And this constant striving is what produces weariness. And the tragedy is not that success or relationships are wrong. The tragedy is expecting them to do what healing can do. In our running, we search for life everywhere else except where life is. Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. He did not say that he came to improve performance, to improve your life. He did not say he came to make you more accomplished, more successful, more admired. He came to restore life because life is not found in constant motion and striving. Life is found in communion. Life is found in resting. Life is found in abiding and in returning to the one who formed your soul and breathed life into it in the first place. In many ways, that is the story Jesus tells in the parable of the prodigal son. The son's deepest need was not simply a change of circumstances, it was a return home. Before he recovered what he had lost, he had to return to the Father. And in the same way, the restoration of the soul begins by returning to the one from whom life came. And this is why Jesus gives us one of the most beautiful invitations in Scripture, Matthew 11:28 to 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. The answer to a weary soul is not trying harder. The answer is coming home. And what is a yoke? In ancient times, a yoke was a wooden beam placed across the necks of two oxen, which bound them together so they could walk in the same direction and pull up the same load. A yoke is not just about carrying weight, it determines what you are connected to, it determines the direction you are moving in, it determines who is leading you and whose pace you are following. And a fragmented soul is like a soul trying to live under competing yokes. constantly being pulled in different directions. One part wants to trust while another part is terrified. One part wants intimacy while another part pushes people away. One part knows God's promises while another part believes the lies of past wounds. That is exactly what a weary, divided soul feels like, trying to walk in two directions at once. But the yoke Jesus promises brings those divided parts back under one Lord, one truth, and one direction. When Jesus invites us to take up his yoke, he is saying, become joined to me, walk with me, learn from me, let me set the direction, let me set the pace, and let me determine the burden you carry. Everyone, honestly speaking, every one of us is already carrying a yoke. Some of us are yoked to shame. Some of us are yoked to fear. Some of us are yoked to the opinions of people. Others are yoked to performance, believing they have to earn love, acceptance, or significance. We become attached to wounds, identities, and coping mechanisms that were only meant to help us survive a temporary season. We allow them to become our identity. Trauma should be temporary. Grief is meant to be processed. Fear is meant to alert us of coming danger, not to become our identity. Shame is meant to be exposed by God's grace, not carried for decades. Yet we remain yoked to rejection long after the relationship has ended. We remain yoked to fear even when the danger is already gone. We carry yesterday's burdens into today's life. And whatever you are yoked to becomes the lens through which you see the world. Whatever you are yoked to becomes the boundaries of your life. If you are yoked to fear, every opportunity looks like a threat. If you are yoked to rejection, every silence feels like abandonment. And so, Jesus doesn't just invite us to lay our burdens down. He invites us into a different way of living. He invites us to exchange yokes. He wants to change the lens through which you view life. You lay down the yoke of fear and take up peace, the peace that surpasses understanding, the peace that Jesus promises, the peace that doesn't come from the world. You lay down the yoke of striving and learn to abide. You lay down the yoke of shame and receive God's grace. You lay down the yoke of performance and receive your identity as a beloved son or daughter. You lay down the yoke of control and learn to trust his sovereignty. You lay down the yoke of rejection and receive his acceptance. The yoke that Jesus promises doesn't crush the soul, it aligns the soul to him. And Jesus is not just offering relief from burdens, he is inviting the whole person into a life that is aligned with him, a life that is in alignment with his word. And under his lordship, the divided parts of the soul begin to move in the same direction again. And so, in summary, the soul becomes fragmented by trauma. It becomes yoked to pain. It becomes yoked to fear, shame, striving, false identities. And that is where the weariness of the soul comes in. And Jesus comes in and invites us into a new way of living. He, he invites us into a new yoke. And under his yoke, the soul finds rest, alignment, and ultimately restoration. And so perhaps the question isn't simply, why am I so tired? Perhaps the deeper question is, what has my soul been carrying all these years? And what is Jesus inviting me to lay down today? If, as you've been listening today, you've recognized your own story in these words, your own weariness, your own striving, your own grief, your own hidden grief, I want you to know something. Healing is possible. You are not beyond restoration. Jesus is still in the business of healing souls. Many of these themes are explored more deeply in my book, I Dared to Wait. And although the book is written through the lens of waiting, it is ultimately about how God meets us in our brokenness, restores the fragmented places within us, and leads us back into wholeness. If you'd like to continue this journey, I'll leave the links to the book in the description below. And there's a song that really blesses my soul. There's a song that I've come to really love and appreciate, and it's a Kikuyu song. I'll just sing it. Jaura merigo de iria merito neria mehodo ere tumaga nemone gukugosha Jaura merigo de Jaura merigo de Iria merito neria mehodo ere tumaga nemone gukugosha Jaura merigo de. It's a prayer to God that He would unburden the weights that we've carried, the burdens that we've carried for years, the burdens that weigh our lives down. And it's my prayer for you guys today that God will unburden the burdens that you've carried, the burdens that have made your soul weary, the burdens that have hindered you from living up from living out the full potential that God created you to live. Yeah, the burdens that hinder your relationship with God from moving another step. Yeah, that is my prayer for you guys today, that God will unburden you of the weights that you've carried. And thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode encouraged you, consider sharing it with someone who may be carrying a weary soul. And until next time, may the good Lord restore your soul.